Zhu Jing made a direct decision. You're right, time waits for no man. What if these guys run away to another city and cause more killings there? The Heavenly God Squad will be in charge of this mission. We must quickly end this farce. Even though they knew there were risks, there were some things they had to do. The investigation squad's purpose was not to go on perfectly safe missions, but to use their strength and blood to fight for a bright future for this land. Deng Shintong said with a firm gaze, "Yes, Commander." Zhu Jing looked at him with a stern expression, but his gaze was a little softer. After the mutants in the outer city have gathered, you need to meet with them. After all, they are cooperating with your operation. Deng Shintong ran his hand along his chin and suddenly asked, "Is Zhang Yi from Tianhai City joining us on this operation?" Zhu Jing nodded with a smile. His name is indeed on the list. Zhang Yi chatted with Bai Li Changqing at the password bar and learned some about the changes in Linhai City. He already had some calculations in his mind. For this operation, his personal safety would still be the first priority. While ensuring his own safety, he would try his best to kill as many Ronin as possible. After all, there were only 13 people in Eclipse Moon, and Zhang Yi knew very well that they were able to cause chaos in Linhai City only because they were not restricted by any power. The Jiangnan region has too large a jurisdiction to concentrate a large number of troops against them. Otherwise, with the 6 investigation teams and 5,000 Yan Yunwei at their disposal, the Eclipse Moons would have no chance of winning even if their numbers were multiplied many times over. Therefore, the end of this farce is inevitable, but the process is still unpredictable. The Eclipse Moons are not stupid enough to fight the Jiangnan region to the bitter end. If they choose to run away, or keep on scurrying around Jiangnan region, that would be the most troublesome problem. Apart from Blizzard City, the headquarters of Jiangnan region, there is hardly any city in Jiangnan region that can contend with them. After all, that is an organization that has gathered the most vicious thugs in the Kanto region. However, except for Tianhai City. If they run to Zhang Yi's territory, they won't be able to get any advantage either. It's just that Zhang Yi doesn't want to see that kind of result. In the afternoon, Zhang Yi received a message from Wan Xingqing. He was told to go to the combat center the next morning to attend a combat meeting. Zhang Yi laughed when he read the message. I thought Commander Zhu would want to talk to me alone. Looks like I was wrong. He shrugged at Bai Li Changqing. This was a good thing. It meant that Commander Zhu Jing didn't care much about his presence, and Zhang Yi was happy not to be noticed. Bai Li Changqing laughed heartily. The people summoned from the outer city this time are all first-class experts. You're not the only one. Commander Zhu doesn't want to meet with each of you individually either, so it's more convenient to chat with everyone together. His eyes flashed. After all, this time, it involves very important and complicated matters. There's a lot of information you don't know, and I have to explain it to you one by one. Zhang Yi nodded. That's good. He was also very interested in these top experts from the outer city. Last time, there were too many people, and he couldn't tell who was strong and who wasn't. This time, due to the special nature of the mission, the people who came were definitely masters of extraordinary strength. It would be nice to exchange ideas with them. As Zhang Yi thought this, he unconsciously forgot one thing in his heart: his strength was top-notch in the entire Jiangnan region. This was Zhang Yi's old problem. His overly cautious attitude made him accustomed to valuing others. However, since Zhu Jing didn't see him today, then Zhang Yi reached out and knocked on the black plexiglass table, smiling and saying to Bai Li Changqing, "Let's drink together then." Bai Li Changqing laughed and pressed the service bell. "Yes, let's drink to our heart's content today." Zhang Yi has always had a good drinking capacity, and that night, he and Bai Li Changqing and the others emptied many bottles. It wasn't until the middle of the night that Bai Li Changqing drove the car to send Zhang Yi and the others to the apartment that entertained the outer city mutants. I don't know if it was on purpose or by accident, but Bai Li Changqing only gave them one room. Liang Yu had drunk less wine and her head was still quite clear. She looked at Zhang Yi, who was lying on the bed, and only then did she realize that the two of them were sharing a room, and she couldn't help but blush slightly. Just when she wanted to go and get another room, Zhang Yi suddenly sat up from the bed. Although his eyes were a bit fluttering, his mind was still clear. That little bit of wine was not enough to make him drunk. With Zhang Yi's character, it was also impossible for him to really get drunk in an unfamiliar place. Have they all left? Zhang Yi yawned and opened his mouth to inquire. Liang Yu bit her lip, put her long sword aside and said leisurely, "Gone." "Are you pretending to be drunk?" "That is not true." Zhang Yi said indifferently, "Even if I am drunk, my head is still clear." He did drink a lot, but only at the start. Later, even when Wu Di had come up and played his revenge with drinking, Zhang Yi had secretly utilized the ability of dimensional space and poured most of the wine in. He took out a bottle of milk from dimensional space and asked Liang Yu to help warm it up with a kettle. Then Zhang Yi sat on the bed, and with a wave, Flower jumped up and sat cross-legged on his lap. Zhang Yi stroked Flower while on the bed and pondering over the information he had acquired today. His eyes were snow-bright and glittered with wisdom. Liang Yu warmed the milk and brought it over to hand it to Zhang Yi. This time, the region has summoned the top mutants from the outer cities instead of the forces from all sides like last time. It also means that the tactics have begun to change. It's no longer a siege battle using the advantage of numbers, but rather an elitist team. So you're saying having large numbers is no longer useful? Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. This approach was indeed correct. After a mutant's level reached Delta, especially the combat-type mutants, their power had already far surpassed the realm of human understanding. It was even possible to ignore the vast majority of light thermal weapons. In such a state, low-level mutants as well as ordinary humans, even well-trained warriors, would have trouble being effective in front of them. It was only after the 10 mutant organizations were exterminated that the Jiangnan region realized this and began to change its combat methods. And next, it would be the Heavenly God Squad that would lead the way, with the outer city mutants most likely assisting in the battle from the sidelines. Then what was the duty of himself and the other outer city mutants? Cannon fodder? Zhang Yi softly recited these two words under his breath. However, he quickly shook his head and denied the idea. If they wanted cannon fodder, a large number of ordinary mutants and elite warriors would be the best choice. And this time, the people drawn over were definitely stronger than the first batch of the top 10 mutant organizations and humans. These outer city mutants of ours, although our overall combat ability is not as good as Blizzard City's specialized team. But the individual combat ability may not be much weaker than them. According to some of the intelligence we poked around earlier, Eclipse Moon only has 13 members. No matter what, our numbers are at an advantage. So that's why the region's consideration is for us to put a hold on those people. And then create an opportunity for Heavenly God Squad? I think that it will just be us making sure that those Ronin won't escape. After all, once they realize that something is wrong, they will most likely just run away. Chasing them down can be much harder than annihilating them. Zhang Yi nodded and took a sip of the warm milk after receiving the bottle. Drinking this after drinking wine indeed made the inside of one's stomach feel much warmer and cozier. Yeah. It's easy to divide the winners and losers, but this is a war, and others won't pull back and fight you to the death. They'll use all sorts of plots, and they'll run even if they can't beat them. He suddenly thought of an interesting fable and looked at Liang Yu with a smile. Teacher Liang, I want to ask you a question. If a mouse runs into an ammunition depot with fire in its mouth, what should we do? Liang Yu blinked her eyes, and she quickly responded. This was a very classic story from a movie or TV drama production decades ago. Well, let the cat chase after it with water in its mouth. She smiled. We are the cat, and the eclipse moon is the mouse. Zhang Yi smiled and asked, except what are water and fire in the context of this story? Liang Yu frowned slightly, this question was a bit puzzling to her. Fire should refer to the various negative effects that they bring. As long as they exist for a single day, the region won't be able to have peace of mind within, and moreover, it will also make people think that our Jiangnan region is incompetent outside of the region. As for water, I'm not sure. Water was used to put out fires. How could she know how the Jiangnan region planned to resolve these Ronin? Zhang Yi took a deep breath. Perhaps, the water is us. Us? I don't really understand. Liang Yu was confused. Zhang Yi rubbed Flower's head hard. We acted together with Heavenly God Squad, and the main force is naturally Heavenly God Squad. Then, we might be the ones used for offerings and sacrifices. If it were possible, I believe that the higher-ups of the region HQ would not mind at all exchanging our lives for the demise of the Eclipse Moon Group. Wouldn't you agree? This, too, was the biggest concern in Zhang Yi's mind. He didn't mind facing danger to go and fight against the Eclipse Moon. But he was also unwilling to go as cannon fodder. Liang Yu's eyes shook terribly as she wanted to say something, but she didn't know how to speak when the words reached her mouth. Indeed, according to common sense, this was the situation. I don't really think there's anything wrong with the Jiangnan region doing that. Even on the battlefield, there is the practice of baiting the enemy, having a portion of the soldiers as bait to be sacrificed. That's how war is supposed to be. In order to gain victory in the grand scheme of things, small soldiers and even large vehicles can be sacrificed. Everything is for the sake of winning at the end of the battle. But he lowered his head and stroked Flower, feeling the soft warmth of its fur, which had always been his favorite. I'm not that great. And especially with you and Flower, we need to be careful when we're together. No matter what happens, you have to remember one thing. To put our own safety first. Once you realize that your life is in danger, escape to a safe location as soon as possible. Liang Yu was silent for a moment after hearing this. She suddenly raised her head and asked Zhang Yi seriously, even if the mission fails due to our escape, should we still do this? Zhang Yi glanced at her, his gaze tinged with playfulness and flirtation. Do you consider yourself to be too important? If the Jiangnan region really wants to eliminate Eclipse Moon, they can do it any way they want. It's just that they're weighing whether the price they need to pay is worth it. There's even a possibility. If the price that needs to be paid is too much, it's possible they're willing to negotiate with Eclipse Moon to allow them to survive in this land. It's the end times, everyone has their own interests to protect. Even the top ranks in Blizzard City are not an exception to this. Liang Yu was greatly shocked as she said excitedly, that's impossible. That kind of thing will be reviled by the world if it's done. But Zhang Yi smiled and said, ever since the day Blizzard City called a meeting of all mutant organizations in the Jiangnan region to set up the Superpower Federation, it meant that Blizzard City was powerless to govern the entire region. This was not just the current situation in the region at the moment, but all over the world. Huaxu's national power was strong, and it was still able to maintain the stability of the 6 regions. As for the other countries, many of them were falling apart, with large and small mutant forces. Even Neon itself was divided into 2 major organizations, the Pelican, in the western part of the country, and the Azumo, in the eastern part of the country, with many other mutant organizations such as the Eclipse Moon, and other shadowy organizations intent on subjugating them. Conflict and chaos will become more and more frequent with the emergence and growth of mutants. In the classic words of the 3 kingdoms, the world's situation would be divided and united for a long period of time. Zhang Yi's heart had long been prepared for this. The nature of the heart produces many changes, but a person's nature is very difficult to change. Only, Liang Yu had experienced the former. Zhang Yi had to make it clear to her, so that she wouldn't get carried away in the heat of the moment. After all, it wasn't the first time that she had gone on a risky journey due to overzealousness. Liang Yu was not as good at talking as Zhang Yi. She pouted her lips, and after a long moment of silence, she hugged her arms and said, everything is your reasoning. Got it. Anyway, when the time comes, I'll just do whatever you tell me to do. She was teaching physical education. She was very good with the sword, but making her use her brain was more or less a bit of a challenge. Zhang Yi nodded in satisfaction, that's right. Zhang Yi looked at her, and then at Flower, who was enjoying itself on his lap, and felt that this kind of partner was really excellent. In his heart, he felt that this type of partner is really excellent. Strong in battle, and obedient, it simply couldn't be any better. When he thought of the meeting tomorrow, Zhang Yi said, "All right, it's getting late, let's take an early rest." With that, he hugged Flower and stood up, intending to take a bath and go to bed. Liang Yu's face tentatively reddened. Rest. Rest. Zhang Yi blinked, and only then did he remember that Bai Li Changqing had only given them a room. He also wondered if he had drank too much and forgot about this. Perhaps Bai Li Changqing felt that the two of them had an unusual relationship. Crap, it's already at this hour, and the management of the apartment has already rested. Zhang Yi rubbed his chin, feeling a bit troubled. Zhang Yi continued to lay on the bed, a very large double bed. In all honesty, it wasn't something he did on purpose. He was so full of thoughts about dealing with Eclipse Moon that he didn't even think of this. Liang Yu's face flushed red with embarrassment as she forced herself to calm down and twisted the door handle with the intention of going out. "I'd better go out first." Zhang Yi said faintly behind her, "It's so cold outside at night, do you want to freeze to death? Besides, if you don't rest properly today and attend such an important meeting tomorrow, aren't you going to make a fool of yourself?" Liang Yu lowered her head, her voice like a gnat. "But there's only one room, how can I sleep? This bed is quite big, it's okay to squeeze in."